What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Lupinranger versus Patoranger. This episode is episode 2 of the season, and I thought it was a pretty good episode. The episode is called The International Police Chase After Them. Most likely, you would expect, it has to do with the Patorangers chasing after the Lupinrangers and other characters involved in this episode. But we'll get into that throughout this episode because it will make plenty of sense. There is plenty of focus on the Power Rangers, but there's also a lot of focus on the Lupinrangers, and that's probably going to be the case for quite some time. If you know the character bios that were initially brought up when the show was first being announced and we were first getting early details, there was a lot more focus on the Lupinrangers and the stakes that they're under, as opposed to the Power Rangers where they're just sort of like trying to do right by the law. So it's a little bit different, obviously, because, who are the ones that you have a lot more to care about right away? The Lupinrangers, because they have more at stake. The Power Rangers are just trying to do their jobs and, just trying to keep the world at peace. That's all it is. At least so far. Of course, we have to learn more. There will likely be plenty more to the Power Rangers in time. It's just a question of when will that be unveiled. But this episode also introduces us to two new things, one for the Lupinrangers, one for the Power Rangers, and it also gives us some backstory on the Lupinrangers and answers that big question that the previous episode I asked you guys, what do you think it is, which is, what do you think the promise the Lupinrangers have with each other is? That is answered through the backstory. So what we end up seeing at first with this episode is that the Power Rangers end up coming to attack Garado and the Lupinrangers, and this basically starts right where the first episode ended. So the Power Rangers try to attack them. We do end up seeing fighting between the Lupinrangers and Power Rangers. One thing that I really appreciate about this episode, and I'm sure will be a constant thing in many cases, is that they're not relying on their counterparts. And by that I mean, for example, say Lupin Red and Power Ren Ichigo. They're not necessarily saying Power Ren Ichigo and Lupin Red have to always fight each other. Same with Lupin Blue and Power Ren Nico, or Lupin Yellow and Power Ren Sango. They're not having to put them, they don't have to put them against each other. So several times over, they'll swap. Red will go up against blue. Green will go up against red. And sometimes they'll be like pink and yellow, but then maybe there'll be other cases where it'll be yellow going up against blue, or not yellow, well, no, not yellow going up against blue, but yellow going up against green, or yellow going up against red, or any of these different combinations. So in other words, there's a lot of variety here, and I appreciate that because they're not relying only on counterparts. They could do that, but I'm glad that they're not. I think that it's much better that they are willing to switch to other characters who they target, which is really good. So there's plenty of fighting between the two teams. Eventually what does end up happening is that Garado realizes that the Lupin and Power Rangers are focused on each other and he can just go. So he does. He ends up, running away. The Lupin Rangers decide that they want to go pursue him, but what happens is that the Power Rangers say, wait, hold on, we need to bring you back for questioning. And what happens is that the Lupin Rangers summon their dial fighters and they end up trying to retreat. But the Power Rangers summon their trigger machines and try to pursue them. So we end up seeing the individual Zords or Mechas for the season actually fight each other, which is a very unusual thing to see because typically it would be, the full Mecha, Lupin Kaiser and Pat Kaiser would be the ones that would be fighting, not the individual trigger machines and the individual dial fighters. So that's kind of nice to see, especially since it's vehicles, because it definitely happens with animal mechas sometimes, but not usually with vehicles. So that's kind of nice to see. There's definitely interesting things that occur there. Like one of the really cool moments is at the end with the it was with Pato Ren Ichigo using his trigger machine to try to actually launch himself off a bridge, and what happens is that Power Ren Sango ends up trying to boost him up using her individual weapon piece of her mecha to actually boost up the bridge that Patoranger Ichigo's trigger machine's on, and tries to launch it towards Lupin Red's dial fighter. And what happens is that Kichiro gets out of his mecha, tries to jump onto Kairi's mecha, and then Kairi drifts out of the way because he notices that Kichiro is jumping at him. So following this, Kichiro falls into the water. But I think that, that whole aspect of them working together and even doing stuff with their individual mechas, it's kind of cool to see. I like that a lot. It's not a common thing. And so it was just kind of neat to see. Now, what we do end up seeing from here is that the Lupin Rangers return to the bistro. They try to understand what's going on with how the Power Rangers have the Versus Changers, and they're going to be pursuing the Lupin collection, and they have to be careful that they be careful what's going on and everything like that, and watch out for the Power Rangers. Eventually, Kairi decides to also leave the bistro, and he ends up going back to the scene where the Lupin Rangers and the Power Rangers ended up fighting against Garado and also each other. And what happens is that when he tries to find clues, he can't, because there are people all around trying to see what's going on with the scene, because that was where the Lupin Rangers and the Power Rangers fought, as well as Garado. And we end up seeing this conversation that occurs with Kichiro and the owners of the jewelry shop that Garado stole from. And what we do learn is that the jewels that were stolen from them are retrieved, but they could not apprehend Garado, obviously. So Kichiro makes a promise to the shop owners that they are going to apprehend the Gangler monster and take them in, and that is their promise. And the thing is that Kairi overhears this, and it resonates with him because he has a promise that he follows too. And this brings into the answer of what that promise is that the Lupin Rangers have with each other. So what we do end up seeing in the backstory is that initially Kairi was not a nice guy. He had a brother who he didn't treat really well, and at one point he ended up leaving his brother in a dark alleyway. And what happened was that shortly after he left his brother there, he was passed by some figure in a jacket, and shortly following this, that figure ends up passing by his brother and freezes him over in ice. Now, we don't actually see the freezing over and all that, but what we can assume is that he was attacked, and when Kairi tries to return back and touch his brother in his ice form, what happens is that his brother shatters and disappears from existence. The background turns into this red, kind of dark and ominous look to it, which makes it very horror-like, which is kind of interesting. And I'm curious if that's an effect given by the monster, or if that's just for dramatic effect. It could be one, it could be the other. It's not clear. We'll have to wait and see, and we probably won't know until that character returns in the show. But that figure ends. But what happens is that we then end up seeing that Toma and Umika have similar situations. Toma was, I believe, supposed to be engaged to a woman that he was set to marry. But what happened was that she also got frozen over, and when he touched her, shatter. Umika had a friend. Same idea, frozen, shatter, and several other people in the area at the time were also in that situation. We do at one point actually see the figure that was this mysterious figure, and that character is shown in the opening theme. He's actually one of the last things we see in the opening theme for the show, which is interesting. So now it makes more sense why he's there, because of his significance to the overall story. So that is very interesting to see. So then we end up learning about how the Lupin Rangers actually got their Versus Changers, which is that Kogura ended up going to each of them and giving them the Versus Changers, and basically saying that his employer is a descendant of Arsène Lupin. In the previous episode, I mentioned this whole idea of Hilltop possibly being Arsène Lupin. So it's probably not that he's Arsène Lupin, but he could be the descendant that's the employer somehow. Now, it's unclear. We don't know anything for a fact, but clearly the Power Rangers have things that the Lupin Rangers don't have, and the Lupin Rangers have things before the Power Rangers have them. So clearly there's something going on there, or maybe there's someone that they're both that like Hilltop and Kogura are working through. It's not clear though, but that is another possibility. We'll have to wait and see if that is the case. But I could see that being another possibility. We'll have to wait and see though. But I like that aspect of it. And what he promises them, Kogura, is that he says, if you collect all the Lupin collection items, you will be able to be granted one wish of any kind. Doesn't matter if it's bringing back a person's life or anything. And if you choose to do so, you will be granted that wish no matter what it is. So, in other words, they all promise that they will collect all the Lupin collection items and bring back those that they lost. So that is their promise. They want to bring back those relatives, those people that they cared about that ended up perishing because of a gangler monster. So I actually like that whole aspect of it. Believe me, I'm saying this now, and it doesn't come across as emotional, but if you see that whole scene and the setup, especially with Kyrie's story, I mean, it's pretty emotional. But just in general, it's definitely an interesting story. I'm looking forward to seeing where that will expand into in the future, because I'm sure that we'll see plenty more of that. And for all we know, those relatives might return much earlier than we thought. So we'll have to wait and see if that is the case, though. So following this, what ends up happening is that Kyrie ends up returning back to the bistro. Eventually, Garado ends up attacking the city again because, he wasn't able to do it before, so now he starts trying to burn down the city, and the Lupinrangers detect that, and what happens is that they go after Garado. In the meantime, the Power Rangers receive a signal from, Jim Carter, and they're told that Garado is back, so the two teams end up knowing they have to go after Garado. So from here, what happens is that the Lupinrangers are the first to arrive on the scene. They transform. We see their whole transformation sequence and their roll call, which is cool. And they begin their assault on Garado. Several interesting attacks occur, and eventually what happens is that Lupin Yellow and Lupin Blue end up holding down Garado, and Lupin Red ends up putting his dial fighter against the safe that's on his chest and begins to put in the combination to unlock the safe and relieve Garado of his Lupin collection item, which is the lighter item that he had, which allows him to burn down buildings. So he ends up taking out that item. They end up retrieving it. Following this, the Power Rangers arrive on the scene, and what happens is that we actually see their whole transformation sequence and their roll call, which is very reminiscent in a way of ToQger's transformation sequence in a lot of ways. Not exactly, but there are similarities, especially when the numbers appear and all that. That kind of resembles in a way ToQger's, just in my opinion. Again, of course, you might say, no, I don't see it, but that's how I look at it. And it's kind of interesting. What we do end up seeing from here is that the Power Rangers and the Lupinrangers at first begin to fight each other, but what happens is that Lupin Red remembers the promise that Kichiro made, and what he decides to do is stop Toma from attacking Lupin Red and also the Portamen that are there. And instead what happens is that the Lupinrangers retreat, and they basically say to the Power Rangers, we got what we needed, you can go and do what you need to do. And so the Power Rangers are a little bit confused, but they just go with it. So at that point, they end up fighting the Portamon, and they actually use the Mega Bow, which is a megaphone item that they have, which is their weapon mode, their individual weapon that they have. So they have the weapon, which is a megaphone, and also has a sword aspect to it. I'm trying to remember what it's called now, but they end up using those two items. What's it called? The X-Rod sword and the Pat Mega Bow. So they end up using those, and what happens is that with the Pat Mega Bow, they actually manage to line up the Portamon in a line, which is kind of reminiscent of Hurricane Blue from Hurricaneger, or if you know Power Rangers, Power Rangers Ninja Storm Blue Ranger Tori, where she would use her megaphone to actually make the monsters do her bidding, which I kind of like that they're doing that kind of throwback, and it worked pretty well. They line them up, they attack them. Following this, the Power Rangers do end up fighting. They end up pulling out a special item that the Power Rangers have, which is the Good Striker. So Patoran Ichigo puts it on his Versus Changer, tries to shoot it, and what happens is that Patoran Nigo and Patoran Sango combine with Patoran Ichigo to create Patoran Ugo, or Union as they also refer to it. So we end up seeing that fusion occur, which is their finishing mode that will likely only be used for the most part for these finishing attacks. It's not clear if they'll use them in other cases, but at least so far that's what we know of them using it for. So they end up using a final attack in Patoran Ugo's mode, and they end up destroying Garado. Following this, we end up seeing one of the Gangler members, the one that's the female Gangler monster for the that's one of the generals, Gochiru Midu or Goshu, I believe it is, ends up coming down, and she ends up putting a gun that's loaded inside of the safe that was connected to Garado, and then she ends up doing an attack of her own outside of the safe. And following this, Garado is turned big. So at that point, what happens is that the Lupinrangers summon their Dial Fighters, and following this, they end up trying to pursue Garado. But what ends up happening is that Patoran Ugo has the Good Striker, but following this, the Good Striker actually leaves the Versus Changer that Patoran Ichigo had, or Patoran Ugo had, and what happens is that it goes to the Lupinrangers. Kairi gets it. He ends up putting it into his mecha and all that, and they end up summoning the Good Striker, which leads to them being able to form Lupin Kaiser. So we actually get to see Lupin Kaiser formed, and that's really cool to see. They end up going up against Garado and doing lots of really cool attacks. It's pretty good combat. I like what they're doing with the mechas. I thought that the mecha footage was pretty decent. It wasn't necessarily the longest footage ever, but it was actually pretty well worked out, and it was just a good time overall. So that was great. Good amount of footage there. We do end up seeing that Patoran Ugo only lasts so long, so like after a certain point in time, they go from having Patoran Ugo to being back to themselves. So like as far as it lasting a while, it's still unclear if it can last much more than it did in this episode, but we'll have to wait and see. Following this, we end up seeing the Lupinrangers return back to the bistro, where they end up talking about how they got back the Lupin collection item, and they're very interested in the Good Striker that they got. And what happens is that Umika wants to call Good Striker Goody, I believe. And the thing is that the Good Striker's like, that's fine, I'm okay with that if that's what you want. So that's something that happens. And then following this, the Power Rangers arrive in the bistro. Umika hides the Good Striker away, and the Lupinrangers and the Power Rangers confront each other in civilian mode. The thing is that the big question that's on Kairi's mind, and I'm sure it's on all their minds, is will the Power Rangers know who they are? And the likely answer is probably not, mainly because of the fact that the only ones that actually should know each other are the Lupinrangers knowing the Power Rangers. The Power Rangers shouldn't know the Lupinrangers because they never had to know them, and they never really knew that they are who they are, really. So that's important. Because in the first episode, when they saw the Lupinrangers for the first time, they saw them as Lupinrangers. They didn't see them in their masquerade outfits. So that's really important to remember. So we'll have to wait and see eventually if like the next episode or the episode after that will finally answer that question as to whether or not when they'll actually know each other. But it will definitely happen. In the preview, we do end up seeing for the third episode that the Lupinrangers will get to use their finisher, which is the opposite, as I said before. So, this episode, the Power Rangers got to use their finisher. This next episode will be the Lupinrangers getting to use theirs. So, Pato this time, Lupin next time. The mechas, this time we had Lupin Kaiser. Next time we're going to have Pat Kaiser. So, that's the way that they're kind of doing it. I like that because it's good. I think that that's a really good idea that they're, balancing things out. I would imagine, if not by the fourth episode, I would imagine shortly, maybe the fifth or the sixth episode, they would introduce the next, trigger machine or dial fighter, whatever it will be that the teams can use. We'll have to wait and see, of course, but it will be very interesting to learn how that will all work. Of course, the other thing to question is that if the Power Rangers actually are supposed to be able to get different trigger machines, how will that work in the end? Because clearly, if the Power Rangers have things that the Lupin Rangers need in order to get their wish, then that's preventing them from getting what they need. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that will work out in the end. So I definitely am looking forward to seeing where this will all go. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I am Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.